Hello, everybody, and welcome to Event Icons, where you get a chance to chat with the icons of the event industry. I'm Brant Kruger, and joining me from your local airport lounge is Lindsay Martin-Bilbrey. And today we're going to be talking all about design thinking. What is it? Why should we do it? How should we do it? And how can it improve your event attendee experience? We're talking with Lisa Perrine, so you can find out all about it right now.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions, or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #Event Icons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #Event Icons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #Event Icons.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Event Icons. We're really happy to have you here with us talking all about, this is going to be kind of a couple weeks here talking about design. We've got back-to-back episodes dealing a lot about design, and specifically in this episode, design thinking. So today we're being joined with Lisa Perrine. She is an experienced designer, communication strategist, and CEO of Cibola Systems. She and her colleagues focus on the human elements of AV communication, and that's going to be the interplay between workplace culture, communication, how people experience media, how individuals interact with technology. She approaches her work with a mixture of curiosity, creativity, and the expertise gained from completing over 1,000 consulting engagements for such clients as the Annenberg Foundation, Edmunds.com, Sony Music, and United Talent Agency. I think that's the high points. Thanks for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you.
Anything else from your bio that I left out that I should have left in?
No, happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Lindsay, thanks for joining me as co-host as always.
Oh, it's always a party to be here. I can't wait to hear what Lisa says.
Well, why don't we get right into it? So Lisa, we always start with some softball questions. So what got you into events and, maybe even more generally, the design thinking industry? And if you weren't doing that, what would you be doing instead?
I got into this through my undergrad, which was a combination design course that included different kinds of design. But I wound up working for a product design studio, 5 independent designers doing all kinds of really interesting work. My first job was working on the kitchen of an Airstream. Didn't go so well, but I learned a lot. And then I got into studio design.
Like one of the trailers, like an Airstream trailer?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they didn't use my design. It was a good thing. When you're new, you learn. But I did well in studio design. So this was a number of years ago. It was when MTV was starting. If you guys wouldn't remember that, I do.
Familiar with it. I've heard of it.
There weren't any studios around to produce that content. So I worked on the first studio on the West Coast that was actually designed specifically to produce content. So that's how I got into design. And design thinking really has, is a thing now. You see it on the cover of Harvard Business Journal, it's a thing, but we've been doing it the same way for many, many years. Those of us trained as designers, it just didn't really have a name until IDEO and Stanford Design School put it on the map. So that's kind of the short background. If I wasn't doing this, I think I'd work for a nonprofit. We do a lot of work for nonprofits, both on the design thinking side and generally on systems integration side. And I love it, and I love fundraising, which I know is kind of weird, but I think I do that probably in health and wellness. That's a real passion of mine.
It's always kind of nice when your thing becomes a thing.
Yeah, it is. It wasn't my thing, it was our thing. But yeah, now people want me to teach it, and they know what it is, and it's really exciting.
All right. And then Lindsay, you've been kind of throwing in your new kind of question of the week. So I'm going to turn that on.
I like this because it's really interesting. All of our guests get to see so many different places as they're going along it. But I think the hidden side of our business as professionals is that travel is tough sometimes because it looks really cool, but man, it can be interesting. And when we met at the event last week, Lisa, you were sharing some fascinating stories of your time on the road. So what's your craziest travel story that you have?
Since you asked craziest, I'm going to tell a different story. This was actually supposed to be a pleasure cruise. My husband and I were going to Bali for this is in 2002, so quite a while ago, for his birthday, October 12th, 2002. And at the last minute, our trip was canceled. And it was canceled because the State Department said nobody should travel to Bali. So the group we were with put us on a ship in Costa Rica instead. And we had our hearts set on Bali, so we weren't so happy, but we said, we got the time, both working. So we went, and it started with food poisoning on the plane, and then it went to, being in Panama and getting stung all over by these jellyfish babies, jellyfish larvae. And then we went ziplining, and the guy we ziplined with was in the cabin next to us, and he died that night. And we went back to the Costa Rica port, and we were in confinement, quarantine for 2 days while they investigated. And we were really not happy. But on the night, whatever, it was actually morning here, of October 12th, that nightclub in Bali got bombed. And we would have been there. I don't think we would have been in the
Oh my gosh.
So we were so grateful. This is my big story, like my worst ever, but it has, a happy side as well. I think it's pretty dramatic.
She wins for the best travel story in a while. Right? All right. Well, I feel like there's nowhere to go from.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. It's been a great edition of Event Icons. We hope you can join us next week.
Okay.
Wow.
All right.
So Lisa, what is design thinking? How do you even right? I'm not sure.
Let me just regroup for a moment.
Yeah.
Design thinking. So it's also called human-centered design, and it has classic design thinking has these 5 elements to it. The first is empathy or understanding. The second is define, which is defining the purpose of the problem. Ideation, most of us know what that is, kind of brainstorming ideas. Prototyping, and then testing prototypes. The thing about design thinking is that its characteristic are these 3 things. So multidisciplinary teams, when you do it right, you have a lot of different kinds of talent on your team. You don't just have all of it, same thing. It's not all event planners, right? It's not all clients. It's lots of different kinds of people. The next is that it involves users in co-design. So it actually takes the end user. We sometimes, I think, in our businesses think of the end user as who's paying us. But the reality is the end user is whoever is going to be there at the event, right, and experience it, and whoever the event is produced for. Hopefully it's produced for them and not for somebody else. And so they become part of the design, and they're part of the design all the way through. The third part of it is that it's iterative. So those 5 steps I talked about, they aren't necessarily linear. They can be used in any order, and you often go back and you do things again. You test something and that didn't work. And the idea is to fail early. So when you come out with a solution, you've done it in a really cost-effective and time-effective way, and it really suits what the user's goals are.
Is it kind of analogous to software to a certain extent, where it's the company that buys the software, but really it's the people at the desks that are using it?
Exactly.
It kind of strikes me like that. Yeah. And I think it's a really important point, because that is something that frequently gets lost, is that you're trying so hard to please your stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen an event where the attendees are just not digging it, but the people who are writing the checks are just happy as clams.
They're all doing this, right? Yeah. They're all on their phone.
Yeah, or worse. Tech guy, right? So I'm in the back of the room, and so we know what happens in the back of the room is the cool kids that don't care. So the things that I've actively heard people saying in the back of the room during an event, like a work event, is like, oh man, if they only knew.
Yeah,
and the money we don't have live Twitter streams anymore.
Yeah, smart.
Much less with now we're talking about, marketing dollars and things like that, where, quite literally thousands, hundreds of thousands, and possibly even millions are being spent on, on something, who's the user in that case.
So I think that brings up a good point then, Lisa, though, because really thinking about it, knowing that the end user is the attendee, how should all the stakeholders work together? What roles, are there specific roles each one of us should play, or is it something where it's kind of valuable as you get into the process and create together?
There are roles, but they shouldn't be roles, I think, based on what profession we have. There's a marvelous book, and we'll talk about resources later, but there's a book called The 10 Phases of Innovation that came out of IDEO many years ago. And it talks about roles we can play when we work as a multidisciplinary team. And I think it's really instructive because sometimes you want somebody who's an anthropologist, or you want somebody who is an naysayer or a storyteller or a mother. I mean, there are lots of different roles we can play. And I think as you start to get into it, it sometimes helps to put yourself in a role that's not really your normal role. The important thing here is to have a lot of different kinds of thinkers in the space and people with a lot of different kinds of experience.
I get distracted by the chat. So regular watcher Heather says that she has trouble with the leadership team that thinks the event is for them and not for the attendee, even though they say otherwise. So how do you get past that without losing your job? I know it's kind of a little tangent, but I think it's worth.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'm going to be a little flip here. Do you really want to work for someone who's like that? But then beyond that, yeah, you don't want to lose your job. It's funny. I was just at the Design Thinking Conference last week. So it's once a year. It was in Austin. And that came up more often than anything else. How do we get our senior leadership to really understand this? And my answer, and I think the answer of a lot of people in the room who've had some success, is to start doing some design thinking activities that are not about a specific event. So helping these kinds of individuals to learn the value and the power of pulling in users and really defining what the success factors are. I think there should be a success factor for everything you do, one success metric that you can measure. And that whole define phase is where you actually look at that and you say, what are we really trying to solve? Why are we doing this? What's our purpose? And how will we know we were successful? So I would hope that whoever that person is would be able to come around through some maybe hands-on experiential practice and understand that you have to step back and say, if I'm going to invest $500,000, what's my return on investment? How do I measure it? And then who's going to best help me get there?
So when you're thinking about that single success metric, is it different for different organizations knowing how that is, or is there a single one that you like to apply across the board that kind of helps people find a benchmark according to other groups?
I think it's all over the place. If people are really thoughtful about what they're doing. So, I think, Lindsay, you and I talked last time we were together a little bit about some of the success metrics that I've seen. We do a lot of work with the experience centers. So there are sometimes temporary places that are set up. It could be for a week, it could be for a month, it could be for a year, but they're not meant to be there forever. And we've done several of those. So we did one for Microsoft that was really set up to have people, senior CIO type people, C-level people come in and look at what they had in development and give them some feedback about what might or might not work in their environment. And these were things that were, maybe 5 years out from production. So they were really early stage. They signed an NDA and they came in to see it. That was just about gathering data. So their real success metric was, could they get enough buzz going around this, enough enthusiasm that people would really want to come and help them and give them a straight answer about what might or might not be useful. So that's very different than some of the other things we've done. We did a project for a talent agency, and that was all about them just trying to get their talent to rethink how media could be used. And so that was, how many contracts can we sign for different kinds of deals than we're normally doing? I think, and sometimes it's just, so for fundraising, sometimes it's just about money. I'll talk about that maybe in a little while, say more. But yeah, I think you have to really dig deep and say, if we had to choose one thing, how would we know? How would we know that this was out of the park?
I really like the examples you've given, though, because so many times as event planners, right, we think it has to be this big, huge annual conference, sales and incentive events. But sometimes the experiences we are designing is as simple as getting excited about pulling data in and creating that experience for the board meeting or the thought summit. And it's not a lot of bells and whistles for what you would typically think of as events.
Yeah.
And so it really keeps it in an easily accessible, tactical kind of way and helps us understand that we can design all of these different experiences. And that as long as we have that purpose. So, one of the things that you were talking about last week is the how might we? And you had said it about your team. And so how can you do that, especially around the conversation for metrics and success? How does the how might we conversation figure into that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. How might we follows why? So really the empathy stage of design thinking is why. Did you ever hear the 5 whys? Ask why 5 times, and it'll start to get you down to what the real purpose is. And I love that. In a respectful way, usually if you'll ask why 5 times, you'll really get to the core of why you're doing something, what the purpose is. The how might we then takes that why, and it says, how might we accomplish that? And often we'll have 3 or 4 how might we's around an objective, and we'll test them out. The techniques for that, I use all the time, as do we all, sticky notes. And I like having people take Post-its and write, 5 ideas of solving the how might we on their own, so there's not groupthink. And then grouping them together and prioritizing them and putting them on an impact canvas. So actually looking at, on one axis, what's going to have the most impact, and on another axis, what's the most difficult or what's easiest. And the thing that ends up in the easiest and most impactful tends to give you some direction. And then you might do it again and do it again. There are some other ways, though. Just last week, I was doing a different process where you take a piece of paper, and if it's the 3 of us, then I would write down the how might we question and one idea I have that's maybe a kind of crazy idea. So you try to be a little crazy, because that leads you, to something a little more creative. And then I would pass it, let's say, to Lindsay. And Lindsay would write, this isn't going to work because. So she would shoot down my idea. And then I would pass it to, or she would pass it to Brent, and Brent would say, okay, I know a different idea that would overcome that barrier that Lindsay just put out. And you do that a few times, and it's amazing how powerful some ideas might be, some how might we ideas. It's really a fast creative process, and it's a way, again, to not sit at a table and brainstorm together, but to do some individual work that still harnesses the collective power of the team.
I'm always fascinated by opportunities to bring in and give people a chance to get some negative things onto the table, sometimes especially in U.S. culture and to a certain extent some of the Pacific cultures. That's all about the go, 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 and giving someone that opportunity to say, this is why that might not work in a safe way, in an environment where that's going to be, okay, that's part of the, part of the exercise. So that's always interesting when you get that opportunity. But then how do you get around it? How do you solve it, right? So you're not just bringing up negative things just for the sake of being negative. You're actually all pulling together in the same direction ultimately. But like you said, a nice mix of, individual work, but also taking advantage of the group stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, we kind of, early on, you started talking about the planner themselves possibly moving into some different roles. And I know we also want to kind of get into what's being called in a lot of places kind of personas and roles for the attendee as well, making sure all those people. But I wanted to make sure we didn't, go too far away from that and give you the opportunity to go back to that, because I think that's a really interesting idea. The idea of the planner kind of taking themselves out of their role and putting themselves into some other roles. What would those roles look like potentially?
So I think the first thing to think about is the planner not as an expert, but as a guide and as a design thinking guide. So one role you can take is actually, as you're doing the planning, to be the advocate for doing something a different way. And, you might start that if you've never done this with a lower profile, maybe a creative client that has a limited budget. And a lower profile event, and work your way up so you have a portfolio of successes. So I think the first way to do that is to be a guide. I think once you get on the team and you're part of that team, you can either be the facilitator if you have some practice, or you may want to pull in a friend who has more practice doing it. And then I like to have people alternate roles. So again, I think, I would look at that 10 Faces of Innovation if you're interested. It's a great book. It's older, but it's fantastic. And it actually describes what those roles are. And you can ask everybody there to play a role and then swap halfway through. And maybe you are a very outspoken, sort of dynamic person, and it would be good to be the scribe and to be the person who listens, because that's something different than you normally do. So, but I do want to stress that it's important when you embark on this process to be a guide and not to be an expert.
Well, that was actually one of the things I had a question about, because so many times when we come in as the planners, especially with a leadership or a conference planning team, you have the problem where people fall into their normal roles. And so without pre-work, so from somebody starting this new, helping an event planner be a guide, what would be some recommendations that would help them set it up to be a successful exercise?
You know, when we do these, they're pretty orchestrated. So did one in Toronto that was interesting for a financial services firm where we had really senior executives, and it's hard to get them, and it took a couple months planning ahead. And we did some individual interviews with them to understand their perspectives around this communication issue they were facing, and understand, you know, sort of what their pain points were. Came up with a group of 3 how might we questions, gave them to them in advance to give a little thought to, and then brought about 20 of them into one place for an afternoon and orchestrated that process. I mean, we had an agenda, we had examples. I like to recommend, if somebody hasn't done this before, not that you try to shortcut it necessarily, but that you use a guide. And if you don't want to, so the first time you might want to get a facilitator. There are lots of facilitators across the country for design thinking, but I also think you can do it yourself. The Stanford D School has an amazing virtual crash course in design thinking, and I recommend it to almost everybody who's interested, and I hope everybody listening will have a look at it. It's just, you go to Stanford, to the design school or the D School, and then put in virtual crash course. And it has video, it has some exercises you can do, it has facilitator guides. And I think practicing, so I'm going to go back to practice on something that's kind of low risk. Actually, I just talked to somebody the other day who was practicing, she's just learning this, she was practicing trying to figure out their summer vacation with her family. And she got the Stanford D School process, and it has what's called a bootleg boot camp. So it gives you all the different techniques you might use. And she facilitated with her family and actually very proudly showed what the result of their efforts were. And so they had a storyboard at the end of it. Their prototype, their final prototype they tested and refined, was a storyboard of their vacation together for the summer.
I love that. That might be something I have to do, because ours is always so complicated. I wanted to go back and have you unpack a little bit more about the experience centers. You were telling me some crazy stories about the Academy of Hair and this flexible venue that could do almost anything. And so could you share a little bit about what is an experience center? Sure. And how it relates to design thinking?
So there are really 2 different kinds of experience centers that we work on. One is more of a fixed venue where people come in, and for whatever the success metric is, they go through an experience that's kind of been programmed in a sense. One of the ones I love that we worked on, and we still work on, it was for a division of Siemens, BSH. They do all different kinds of appliances. Bosch, you probably know. I have a Bosch dishwasher, it's great. And so we did an experience center that allows kitchen planners to come in, kind of like event planners, right? Kitchen planners, they help guide people through doing kitchens. And they bring kitchen planners there to experience all the different kinds of product they have. But rather than just looking at product, they cook. So I love this because this is all about different kitchens where people can cook with professional chefs, and they do these events where they cook together. It's been fabulously successful. Their success metric, 30% increase in sales over 2 years, absolutely made it. I mean, it was so successful for them. So that's one kind of experience center. The Academy of Hair is quite different in that it has 7 different brands under one roof. It's a recently combined group of companies. So there was one main brand for Henkel, which is a German company called Schwarzkopf, and they sell product to salons and to independent hairstylists. And they decided to bring all these 7 together under one roof, under one company. And so they needed a space that could be instantly branded for 7 really different kinds of companies. So there's Joico, there's Sexy Hair. You can imagine Schwarzkopf and Sexy Hair have a bit of a different branding, kind of an aesthetic, right? And so the whole space is really a canvas. It's a concrete and glass canvas that gets transformed by light and by all these LED panels all over the place. One's huge, it's 16 feet wide up at front. And there's a signage system and a content management system that just feeds content to it, and they schedule it all ahead, and this is how they rebrand the space. What I love about that is everything I've seen them do, I've been to several of the events now because they're really fun. Everything is hands-on. So just like with BSH, it's all about a hands-on experience and not sitting, listening to someone talk. There's none of that. They are doing, one day I was there, they were doing Tai Chi to try to understand how to do business better. I didn't quite get it because I'm not in that business, but it was really cool. All these stylists doing Tai Chi and then going over and styling hair, after they do their Tai Chi. So yeah, it's very different in that it's a venue space, not unlike maybe some of the venue spaces you use, that's optimized, that has amazing audio capability, amazing video capability, as good as it gets, amazing lighting, super easy interface. Brant, you'll appreciate that as a production guy. And they just, literally the branding manager says one button and it's gone from Joyco to sexy hair.
Now, as part of that, one of the instances you were sharing had to do with the hair follicles. And the reason I'm thinking about this is sometimes we create spaces, right? And the client or the association's like, we need this type of aesthetic and this feeling. And you're like, do we though? Is that really the space we're going for? Yeah. And so tell me how that plays a role. I mean, how is the hair follicles conversation helped by design thinking? Because I know my initial reaction as an event planner, I'm like, maybe a different step and repeat would solve the same issues.
So what you're thinking of, I know I tell this story, that's kind of a funny story, I think. The brand manager, James Jordan, who's awesome, was involved in every step of the process. I mean, he was so hands-on and he really understands all of the brands. So he was able to translate each one of the brands' objectives and aesthetics into, as we looked at the space. A lot of people, when they're designing user interfaces, if they're, so a control panel or whatever it happens to be, an app, they don't really want to involve the user, but he was involved. And we said, what do you want it to look like? And he sent us an image of some pink hair follicles. He's probably going to listen to this. So James, I'm sorry I told this story on you, but it, it probably looked really cool if you're a stylist and pink is in. But when we put it on the control panel with buttons on it, not only could you not see the buttons, but really it looked like like something you'd go fishing with, like a bunch of worms. So anyway, and he was really nice about it. We sent it back and said, this probably is not going to be really user friendly, and it's, if you're not in the business, it's kind of gross. So we ended up with green hair. It looks like grass. It's all good. But yeah, that's just a little example, and some people shy away from that, but frankly, it's just, it's fun because it's so much more interesting to have people who are actually, not only have a different point of view than you do, but really immersed in their business as part of the down and dirty design process. I mean, it's amazing when if you use a structured process with lots of different kinds of smart minds and hearts in the room, how much better a result you can end up with.
I want to take a moment, unless you've got some other kind of stories of some of the experiences you've created. I certainly want to give you the opportunity to do that because they're all pretty interesting for folks. So real quick, I guess, are there any others that you want to throw out there?
Around events specifically, can I tell a little story about a nonprofit that we worked with last year?
Absolutely.
So this really speaks to, again, having the end user engaged hands-on, the end user. So we were working with a foundation in Oregon that has a pretty significant cancer program. And we were engaged to kind of rethink the donor experience. And so what we did was we brought together a group of their current donors and their wish you were a donor kind of people and did workshops. We actually, for this organization, ended up doing 4 workshops with 30 people each. And we had those donors work in pairs and design for each other an ideal donor experience. So Lindsay, if you and I were working together, I would ask you to tell stories about, your charitable giving experiences that were satisfying and vice versa. And then they ended up writing a story for each other. Again, it was kind of a storyboard at the end of what an ideal donor experience would look like. And it became clear, most of the 120 people who participated really wanted to know more about the research being done and to have a hands-on opportunity to be part of it. So this group in Oregon was going to have an event. I don't want to call it a gala, but an annual event. And normally they raised about $500,000. And so they took that and had some of the donors that had helped them give them some guidance. And they ended up changing the event entirely and having labs. So there were labs at the beginning of this event, and people could go participate in the labs. And they literally more than doubled. I mean, they've raised more than $1 million, where they'd always, scraped by at 500. 500 isn't bad for an event, right? For fundraising. But they just blew it out of the park because they listened to the donors and completely rethought. And it wasn't that they had to design it, the donors designed it. I mean, we have actually the storyboards of what they designed and what they wanted the events to be. They also went through a process of, once they had that in hand, then prototyping some ideas, and they got a group together and put them in a room and gave them lunch boxes and then said, eat your lunch and then use the lunch box to prototype what this is going to look like. And so I have these amazing pictures of these box lunches that turned into dioramas of their event. Really fun.
I mean, it sounds like you're kind of suggesting that we lean on attendees as to be, kind of co-conspirators, collaborators.
Co-creators.
Yeah, is that co-creators? I like conspirators, though, to a certain extent.
Well, that's fine too. Depends on what business you're in.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's how can we do that? And so what I'd like to do is kind of dip into that a little bit. How do we as the event people involve the attendees more, and then kind of come back around to what we hinted at earlier, talking about the different types of audience members that are out there and making sure that you're designing for each of those various types. So I know there's kind of two main topics there, but I'll let you go at it there.
I'll start with one, and then if I forget the second one, you can.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So
there's just so much we want to talk to you about.
Well, thank you. It's really fun. Design thinking is a blast. So I think that one opportunity, and I'm thinking of actually a client who did this, and it's a colleague, not really a client. One opportunity is when you're having an event, to give people attending the event the opportunity to help you design the next one, because you have a captive audience. And so this one group I'm thinking of, they actually were at a trade show. And I don't know how many of the people listening do trade shows, but they, rather than having what often happens, sort of a room upstairs where, you have to get invited and you go look at the new product and tell people what you think and get to see it. They said, let's do something totally different. So out on the show floor, they had a curtained off area. It was pretty big. And, you had to sign an NDA to get in. But of course, when you got in there, really, it was just a design thinking space. And it had two parts to it. So one was all about the how might we. So they proposed a couple how might we questions and had people do brainstorming. So they had this amazing, I have pictures of it, it's beautiful, this amazing little space that had stuff all over the walls that people had come up with about how might we question. And then in the next room, they had a very early prototype that didn't really work yet and lots of bits and pieces. And they had people go in there if they were interested and use the bits and pieces to build something new, to actually prototype a product. And what's so exciting about this, I think, is not only that they got a great new product that ended up being just killed the market. I mean, they're in a commodity business. It's actually Legrand, and this was for mounts for screens, LCD screens, LCD displays. And you don't think of that as being super being able to really distinguish yourself, right? But they just did so well with this new system because it was designed by the end users, literally ideated and prototyped and tested by end users, not by their engineering team. So it was awesome. So I think, there are lots of different ways you can utilize those places that attendees already are. I think you can also do some virtual work. Virtual design thinking is not as easy, but there are some technologies that support it. There's a company called Mural. I don't know if you ever ran into them, but they actually have design thinking processes that are virtual, and you can subscribe to it or buy some seats to it and use those when you're doing, for instance, like we're doing Zoom. You can use it with Zoom. It's got a Zoom compatibility to it. So that allows you to do some virtual work that you could do as pre-work. You asked another question though. What the heck was it?
That was my fault. I couldn't stop asking questions. I wanted to come back around to the idea of planning for all of the various different types.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That attend. Some people will call it personas. Some people call it different things. So, one, what do you call it? And two, how do you take those people into account?
Yeah. I actually am not a huge lover of personas. Sometimes we will create them after we go through an intensive set of interviews and prototypes with end users, like I like to call them. So the actual final consumer of whatever you're creating. And then we'll say, we'll break them into 4 or 5 different kinds of categories based on what we learned. What I don't like is using personas when they're not based on real life. So if I'm doing a conference and I have, 4 different kinds of people that come to this conference, I can easily say, I've got an engineer, I've got a purchasing person, I've got a salesperson, and I've got an administrative person. I'm just taking that out of the air. And I make a persona out of those. The reality is I may have completely different kinds of personalities. And depending on what I'm trying to get them to do, whatever my success metric is, I may want to categorize them by motivation. I may want to categorize them by level of energy. I mean, there are lots and lots. Are they introverts? Are they extroverts? Lots of different ways to do it. And I think you can't do that till you go through an initial process with real people with a real how might we question and the little prototyping to see, what different people really need. And then you have a much better feeling for how to use personas. So I also think that, one of the sort of challenges I think of probably a lot of events is that most of what I'm involved in, people are there because they want to be. And when people opt in to come to an event, then it's quite different than when they're forced to come to an event. And if you have as we talked about earlier, a workplace event where people have to come, that's very different. I worked with a firm, really interesting, I want to say 5 years ago or so. And it's a professional services firm, and they were acquiring some related professional services. So it was an architectural firm acquiring a bunch of different kinds of engineering firms. And what they were finding is when they did their all hands meetings, so an event, they were largely disengaged. And they couldn't figure out what the problem was. And their, sort of their ratings on their all hands were dropping pretty significantly. But the more important success metric is they needed these people to all come together because their whole future strategy, the whole reason they did the acquisition was to have an in-house group that could do everything. And yet their professionals were still going out of house and not using their newly acquired firms. So they said, what can we do? Yeah, we want our all hands meetings to be better. And we need to know why they're not good. But what can we do to go a step further and actually reach our success metric? And so we did a deep dive with them to understand that, in their all hands meetings, they were all still about architecture. And they were all still about the mothership. And they didn't realize they were doing it. But they weren't engaging in any meaningful way all the other companies that they'd acquired and all the other locations that they'd expanded to. And so what was interesting is in helping them, we actually went out to their other remote sites to get some feedback from those people about what was and wasn't working for them. And then we went through a whole design thinking process of really rethinking their all hands meetings, which they have every month, tons and tons of people. This is not uncommon in an organization, and really wanting to engage everyone. So I take that back to an even bigger event that might be a once a year event where people are required to be there. And gosh, I think that you have a wonderful opportunity if you're in an organization during the year to have people start to co-create what that event should be. So it really is something that accomplishes a much bigger business purpose. That was a really long answer to your question.
No, I think you established it perfectly. I mean, honestly, what it crystallizes for me is this why, why sit around in a, smoke-filled room or whatever, coming up with personas when you could actually be talking to the real people,
and having them actually make something.
Right. Yeah. And having them be part of the process and part of, so yeah, we can sit around all we want coming up with this type of person and this type of person, but it seems really obvious to actually just go and try and find those kinds of people.
Yeah. And it actually can be less expensive and less time consuming. That's what's so
that's actually my next question, because there's two sides. There's two sides of me, right? The big strategic thinker that gets excited about it, because who hasn't sat in that conference planning meeting and realized, oh gosh, we are completely doing the same thing we've done over and over again, and we can't get outside of our box. I mean, it is such a common realization, and yet you just feel almost paralyzed because you have two paths that come down to it, right? One is we don't have the time or money to move forward with this, even though the design thinking has gotten to you like a great place for the how might we do these things. Then you get into that execution phase and the iterative phase after that. So help us understand a little bit more. It's all well and good to come up with new ideas, but now that we're coming in to actually execute and then measure at the end of it, can we use design thinking to facilitate that and make the tactical planners in the room feel less anxious?
Yeah, you said something that really resonates with me. When, if you do the same thing over and over every year, then the sort of, it seems to me at least, so I'll put on my hat going to a lot of conferences and events. It seems like people try to throw more of at it as opposed to less of and something that's more impactful. So you keep adding more glitz, adding more, and it just gets more and more expensive, as opposed to stepping back and just completely rethinking it. So and it could be, that there's only one or two things that needs to be tweaked in an event to make it better, or it could need to be completely rethought. My impression is part of the problem with a lot of events is that they just aren't participatory. I mean, whether you want to learn or you want to sell or you want to make decisions or you want to, whatever you want to do, we are, as adults, so I'll leave children out of this for a minute. As adults, we want to bring our knowledge, we want to be hands-on, we want to be heard, we want to feel like we're making an impact. And sitting there and having someone talk to us is really never going to be as successful as engaging us in a meaningful way. And I think that's hard to do when you have a big group. But I will tell you a story. And Lindsay, I think I might have told you this already. In February, I went to a conference in Amsterdam, and it was 100 people, technology managers, 98 guys, 2 women, which was a little shocking. But anyway, it was fine. And, the rest of the conference was actually people just talking at the group. But my part of it, thank goodness this was fun, we did a workshop. We did a workshop with 100 people working in pairs, not unlike what I just talked about with the donor workshop, where they were actually working together to design something for each other. And it was fabulous, and it was so well received, and there was so much energy, and there were people that were from different countries, didn't know each other, and I noticed as we were progressing through that one would get up and bring coffee to the other one, and they were patting each other on the back. I mean, they were actually engaging in a really meaningful way. And then we were able to share the research, afterwards from that, what we learned. And so I think even if you have a big group, it doesn't all have to be breakouts, right? I mean, you can do something in a big group that's amazing. I was at another conference recently where I thought this was fun, and maybe you guys have seen this before. I'm trying to think what the company's name is. It's like Eventify or something like that. It'll come to me in a second. But it's an app that you use during a conference. And they had, have you used it? You know what I mean? Okay. So what was fun though is, have you used the colors where your phone turns colors? Yeah. Okay. So, you can actually program that so it's not random. So you can have people that need to meet each other. And they don't know each other. You've probably also seen these, like the beam buttons, right? Okay. So they're sort of silly until you use it as a way to link people together who need to meet each other, who have a common interest and would never meet each other otherwise. And to me, that's what's really exciting. So those are cheap things to do. There is nothing expensive about any of that. I'm going to argue that kind of a conference where it's hands-on, engaging is probably less expensive. Now, does it require a lot of planning? Yeah. And maybe from an event planner standpoint, it's a nightmare because it has to be carefully orchestrated. You can't just say, here are our 5 speakers, and let's make sure that we have a follow spot and that they have a mic on. But I don't think good event planners want to do that. Good event planners want to do something that's incredibly exciting, right? And where at the end of the day, people say, I've never seen anything like this. So
you're getting sassy. I like it. You're just all like, you're coming right over and you're making my heart happy, Lisa.
Yeah, but it's all about engaging people at a whole different level and making them really want to be there. Frankly, even if they didn't want to be there, saying, oh my God, I had no idea it was going to be like this. I'm so glad I'm here.
Along the lines of your how might we say that 10 times fast? I've often said, what if? So yeah, it's when it is a meeting that you have to be there. What if we wanted to be there? Is that so crazy? Is that such a weird thing to ask? What if we actually were sitting in the back of the room and saying, this is amazing. This is awesome. This is incredible. You kind of touched on a little bit of, that it doesn't have to be expensive. Can you elaborate a little bit on that as far as, is this type of process necessarily going to be expensive, or is it something that we can do pretty easily and pretty inexpensively?
Yeah, the process itself is quite easy and inexpensive, except making sure the right people are in the room. So I'll give you a little hint about, people often ask me this, how do you get the right people in the room? And I put it in my contract. I sneak it in there, kind of sneak. I mean, I tell people, but they don't quite, know what the impact's going to be. But I put it in the contract. This is the process we're going to use, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is what you're going to do. So when it comes time for us to bring together some people might grumble and say, well, end users, why are we doing that? So if you're in an organization and you're trying to, further engage, like I had the engineers in the organization, right? Or you've got, you're in an industry association, and you have an industry association event, and you want to pull together a group of people that are in that industry association, not necessarily the leadership or not the conference planners, but people that are actually going to be experiencing the conference. So, you get some pushback, frankly, because it's more trouble for your client in a way, although really you're doing the work. But then I point to the contract and I say, well, no, see, this is a deliverable. We have to do this. This is what we agreed on. And it does work. And it's also good for my team because it means that we won't shortcut. We have deliverables and we go through those and make sure that contractually we've delivered them. So I think kind of rethinking your proposal and contract process is a first step toward actually being able to do this. That wasn't exactly about how to make it less expensive, was it?
No, but it was a good segue into it. Because
Okay.
I think it's a really important nuance though, because many times, it gets shot down for this new methodology of thinking because we say, oh, this is going to be something we need to change. And immediately the barriers are, we don't have the budget for that. And what you're saying is, no, we have the budget, we have the people. It's just making sure that those people are in the room. Like, we have attendees, they're coming to our event already. What does it need for us to do to transform them into participants and make them raving fans who want to be there? And I think that's an important piece of dialogue that event professionals across all of our little spaces and silos, we don't necessarily effectively talk to that point enough because of the experienced designer, because we think it is going to be challenging because it's one more thing on our to-do list as we're putting together the planning of the event. It's sometimes easier to say, oh, we know what the participants need. These are the people who can be in the room rather than these are the people who should be in the room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is a different way of doing it, and it probably isn't right for every event. I'm gonna say, in my heart of hearts, I think every event I've ever attended would have been better if this had been done. And sometimes the stakes aren't high enough, maybe, to make it worth it. But on the other hand, if you think of wasting people's time, that's the worst thing you can waste in life is somebody's time. Wasting money's bad too, but wasting time, that's kind of unforgivable. So my argument would be, I'm back to start small, start where the stakes are low, and you have somebody who's willing to give it a try. And, if it doesn't quite go right, is going to say, that was kind of fun, because it is fun. And it really, the materials to do this cost virtually nothing. I have a little bag that I carry around with me. I have it in my car. I know it's weird. So in case there's ever a design thinking opportunity, I'm ready. And And it has stickies and, dots and stuff in it. And I can kind of do that anywhere with about $30 worth of materials. I think, Lindsay, I might have mentioned the 3-day class that I teach every year in design thinking. And I think we have 5 slots left if anybody's interested. It's in Orlando this year.
Yeah, VIXA Infocom. So it's the AV Professionals Conference in sunny Orlando.
So the theme this year is the visitor experience. So we're going to spend 3 days doing a deep dive into design thinking. And our project is going to be creating a visitor experience, a new visitor experience for 2 venues. So we actually have a real client. But we
have one of the hotels that's coming too, right? You said that you're having hotel leadership come on the last day.
Yeah, it should be really interesting. And so, they come, we go to them the first day and we talk to people. In this case, we'll talk to people in the lobby. We'll talk to people who work there about, trying to understand what a successful welcome experience would be. And then we'll go back and we'll watch them and we'll experience ourselves, sort of what we think it's like watching what people are doing. And then we'll go back and we'll do some iterations of prototyping. And then on the last day, they come back and we tell them the story and they give us feedback. And then there's one last final round. So you really get a deep dive into what it's like and you have a real project to work on and you have a real client, but it doesn't have, I guess for a VIXA, it has a little bit of a risk, in that the people that we're doing this with might say, oh, that was a waste of time. But the reality is, they're doing it because all they need to get is one nugget and it's free. And they've got all these people, there's 30 people and they're actually, trying to help create a better welcome experience for the venue. So anyway, if anybody's interested, it's a 3-day deep dive. But the reason I mentioned it, besides plugging the class, and would love to have, some event planners there. I think the materials for that class for 30 people might cost $150. It's the process takes time, a little bit of time. It doesn't have to take 3 days. More often takes what I talked about in Toronto, 4 hours. There's each person invested a couple hours ahead of time and then 4 hours when they were all together. And it was a fabulous outcome. I wish I could share. It's confidential, but I told you the story. Wish I could share who it was. Anyway, it's really a very inexpensive process.
Well, the good news is you just answered one of my other questions, which was where can event people find out more about design thinking? So that's an opportunity to do so. And we'll give you another opportunity as we're kind of wrapping up to plug websites and all that kind of good stuff. But unfortunately, we do have to start winding down as the time always goes way too fast. So to kind of round out the discussion before we close with the usual softballs as well, if you could kind of pick one tip for planners when it comes to design thinking, what would it be?
I'm going to step back for a second because you said something that I love, the what if, and say one way to think about design thinking rather than making it more complicated than it needs to be is 5 whys. So start with why and ask why 5 times to come up with your success metric. Then how might we? Explore the how might we. And then the what if for us in what we do is actually doing rapid prototyping and putting together as crude as possible a facsimile of the solution and testing that with people. So those things to remember, 5 whys, how might we, what if are the essence of design thinking. I want to encourage everyone to just try it and recognize that while not everyone does it this way with the sort of constant engagement of the end user, the participant, the attendee, it is by far what provides the best outcomes in my experience. I have quite a bit of that. And so I want to encourage people to just go ahead and jump in, do it at home, try this at home first, and plan your vacation, buy your next car, and just give it a try. And I think you'll love it.
Nice. Now, this is another one that Lindsay's been sneaking in, and I like it as well. So what conferences and events do you attend? What's the one conference that you would never miss?
So Lindsay already mentioned that I did too Avixa's Infocom conference, which is really fun. I think it would be really fun for the folks listening who are in events to go at least once, because you can see all the new products, but you can also see how they might be applied. There are lots of classes, and it's in Orlando in the summer, which is not good, but other than that, it's actually great. About 40,000 people go, so it's a sea of humanity. I just went last week for the first time to the Design Thinking Conference. I've never been. My husband actually found it online and said, you should go, which surprised me, but I went. And it was amazing. So I think it's my new go-to. I go to a lot of different things. I try a lot of different things, but it was a group of such enthusiasm, people wanting to engage and learn and excited about doing new things and really knowledgeable. And so I think that's my new go-to.
Nice. And I think that's, to be clear, although we're discussing it in the context of events, this is definitely something that has expanded way beyond just our little niche of the world. It's an entire creative process.
Yeah. And, you ask about where people can learn more. Maybe we're getting to that. But there's something called Open IDEO. And it's in, I think, around 30 cities around the world. So you may or may not be near one. But if you're in a metropolitan area, you might want to look up Open IDEO, because it uses this process to solve social problems. So community problems in your area. And it's really powerful. And it's a group, I think in LA, there are about 200 people in the group. And they come together and they do, a day or two working together using the design thinking process to solve a real world problem. It's a great way to learn from people who have had some practice and to meet some good folks.
All right. Well, we've already dropped some amazing resources into the doc, and so we'll make sure those get published along with this episode, including Mural and the Infocom show and the 10 Faces of Innovation and all that kind of good stuff. Is there anything? I'm sorry?
Denver D School.
Yep. I think we've got that there as well.
Yeah.
But I want to give you an opportunity for any kind of cool new resource that you want to share. It could be a website, a blog, a book, a gadget, something that's working for you these days. It does not have to be related to events or design thinking. Just something that you think people might really enjoy or want to try, or is maybe just working for you.
So I'm going to mention a book that I love, and I think it's a couple of years old, and I bet you a lot of people have read it, but if you haven't, I think you must. It's called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker.
Hopefully, just pulling it up. I knew you were going to mention that one.
Yeah, it's great. So I'm doing a retreat this weekend, and for a nonprofit I'm facilitating. We're using design thinking as part of it. But we use that as our outline, all of us who planned it. The attendees planned it using The Art of Gathering. We read it together, and now we're going to not be a chill host, and we're not going to lead the funeral with logistics. So if you've read the book, you know what I mean. If you haven't, go out and buy it. It's totally worth it.
All right. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Tell people where they can find out more about you and what you're working on, and maybe they want to hire you perhaps as a consultant or something along those lines.
Email address, lperrine@cibolasystems.com. Hopefully you're going to send that out. Is fine.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that gets in the notes.
All my emails. And our website, www.cibolasystems.com. Same URL, has a lot of information about some of the work we've done. And would love to talk to anybody. If you want to just reach out and chat a little bit more about a question you had, absolutely would love to do that with you.
Are you guys on any of the social networks? Anything that people can follow and see all the cool stuff you're doing?
Yeah, not really.
Yes, yeah.
We put a little bit of stuff out there, but
Fair enough.
Our business comes word of mouth, and we don't tend to do a lot of promoting.
And it's Cibola, Cibola, Cibola Systems.com. Out of California. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And Lindsay, thanks for dropping in from your which airport lounge are you in these days?
I'm in Austin this week. I think by the time this is done this year, we'll have hit all the time zones between me and Tahira.
Maybe we need to add a segment, of the kind of reviews of the various airport lounges around the world. But yeah, because between you and Tahira, you guys are all over the place.
Yes, but it was such a great thing. Thank you, Lisa. I'm so glad we met last week and started talking, because you just brought such great insights today. And I hope that we continue to stay in touch.
We will, for sure.
Absolutely. And as we teased at the beginning, this is kind of a twofer because next week's episode is also going to be about design, kind of a different take on it. And I'll just leave it at that. We're not going to get too deep on it. Just leave it as a tease for what's coming up. Thank you all for joining us in the chat. I saw a lot of folks talking about it. We've been dropping the links in there. We had Heather in there and a few other people as well popping in and out. Thank you so much for joining us. That is a fantastic place to join us right there at event-icons.com. We want to remind you this show is recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can join us there at event-icons.com. You can watch us. You can drop in the chat. You can ask questions of our wonderful Event Icons guests. The show, however, is then available to everyone else the following Tuesday on all your favorite pocket podcast apps. I got stumbled on because I'm always thinking about Pocket Casts because that's the one that I use. So let us know if there is an app that we are not on, and we will be sure to be on it. There's been some new ones announced recently, so we'll make sure that we can get on there as well. So again, all of your favorite podcast apps should be able to have it. You can subscribe to the show there, but the best place to watch it is live at event-icons.com. You're going to see the show notes. You're going to see all the resources that we just shared, and you can join the chat right there on the page. We want to know what you think, so join us. Join the conversation either in the chat there or use hashtag Event Icons. Tell us who you want to see on the show. Let us know how we're doing. If we're doing a good job, say so. Leave a rating on iTunes. If we're not doing a good job, let us know what we can do to be doing better. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on Event Icons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of Hashtag Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with hashtag Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on hashtag Event Icons.